Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm going to try to animate hair. I was thinking about the different things I've practiced animating, and I noticed I've never really practiced animating just hair. Many of you enjoy my animation process videos, so I thought you might like seeing me try to learn how to do this. I have also been integrating the TourBox into my workflow. It has really helped streamline my creation process. So I'm excited to tell you all about it. But first, just a reminder, I have only dabbled in animation and still have a lot to learn, so please go easy on me. Don't expect this to be perfect since this is my first time trying to really animate hair. To give me an idea of how I should go about animating hair, I watched these videos and they were really helpful. I'll have links to them in the description. Something I learned from these is the Seaweed Exercise. Basically, we are going to just animate a line swaying back and forth, and this will help me to get an idea for how to animate hair blowing in the wind. As you can see, I drew this kind of figure 8 shape that has some dots along it. This will help me place my keyframes, and the line will follow along this path. From what I learned, there are 4 main keyframes for this. First, we have a letter C-like shape, then a letter S-like shape. Then we basically just have these shapes in reverse. For the motion, we want to think of it as the part close to the base is being moved first, and then the tip is being dragged along. This will help give us the flowy motion. Next, I'm going to add some frames in between these keyframes to help the animation be smoother. This was a process of trial and error. I was trying to make sure to have my line follow the path of the figure 8 shape. Also, the program I'm using is Clip Studio Paint. People often ask what program I'm using in my animation videos. So yeah, I'm using Clip Studio Paint. I have my animation set to 12 frames a second, so this means I'm animating on 2s. Lots of animation is done at 24 frames per second, so it's animated on 1s. But things like Animate are often animated on 3s, so there's 8 frames a second. But obviously this can vary. I often like to animate with 12 frames a second since it feels a bit simpler and is not as overwhelming. But I can also still go into a decent amount of detail. Once I got my first pass of frames laid out, I decided to do a cleaner pass in a different animation folder. Basically, animation folders in Clip Studio Paint kind of make little different timelines on your timeline. So it's a nice way to break things up. Also, you may notice that there are blue and red lines sometimes appearing. Those are onion skins. Basically, when I have these turned on, I can see the frame before and the frame after the current frame that I am on. They are very helpful when doing in-between frames since I can tell where I need to draw for the in-between. So here's my seaweed practice. I definitely learned a lot from it. So now I'm going to use what I learned to try to animate hair. But before I can animate, we need a base to work off of. So I'm going to draw a girl character that will be our model for the hair, so to speak. She is not going to be animated at all since I am focusing on just the hair today. Also, you may notice something new down in the corner. It's a controller that I'm really excited about, and it has really improved my workflow. Let me introduce you to TourBox. Essentially, it's like a remote control for your programs, and not just art ones, but also for a wide range of software like video editing programs. And fun fact, this is actually my second one. I have to admit, there was a bit of a learning curve when I had the first one, but thankfully I pushed myself to use this one, and honestly, it didn't take long for things to start to feel natural. Maybe just a few drawing sessions. And now it is seamlessly integrated into my creation process. And honestly, I wish I would have started using it sooner. I will talk more about TourBox in a bit, but for now let's talk about the animation. So to start off the animation, we are going to be sketching out the keyframes. This first frame is actually one that's not going to make it into the final animation. However, I wanted a reference for the hair in a non-blowing state, so just the default hairstyle with no motion to it. This way I have a base style to refer to. I decided on a kind of shorter hairstyle with bangs so that I could play around with the different lengths of hair, and the shorter hair will move a good amount in the wind. Also, I'm writing the frame and line shape to the side to help me keep track of the frames. For keyframe 2, I'm going to draw this hairstyle again, except all of the strands will be going into this kind of C-like shape. Along with changing to this line shape, the strands are going to move over to the left a bit from their previous position. I imagine the wind is kind of coming from the right and is blowing the hair back and forth. When drawing the strands into the C shape, I was trying to make sure the ends of the strands were being left behind, so we get that kind of dragged along feeling like we did with the Seaweed Exercise. Next was the first S-shape keyframe. Now, this was a bit confusing for me because in the Seaweed Exercise, the base of the strand was at the bottom and we needed that to move first. However, the strands of hair are connected to the head at the top, so I needed that to move first instead. Things feel a bit backwards, so I had to do some thinking to get used to that. In fact, this whole process was kind of just confusing, but I was trying my best to just keep going and trust the process. Next was the second C keyframe. This was basically the same process as the first one, just the C shape is flipped. I don't have much to say about it, so we will make the footage go super speed. And last but not least, we have the second S shape once again. This is similar to the first one, it's just flipped. Honestly, the S-shaped frames were my least favorite to do, especially for the bangs. The shape felt very confusing, and I was trying my best to make it work with all the different hair strands. I get rid of my frame with the hair in its not blowing state. And now here's what the keyframes look like when they are played. It's very rough at the moment, but I will clean things up. But before we move to cleanup, I want to vary the motion of the hair a bit. It feels a bit too in unison. In this video, I learned a way to help the hair feel more varied. Basically, we are going to take one half of the hair from a different frame and move it to the frame that plays after it. The thought is that since the wind is blowing from the right, it takes longer to hit the hair on the left. So I'm going to make there be a delay with the hair on the left. So I take the hair on the left from frame 5 and make it appear with frame 1. This is going to be a looping animation, so that's why I'm copying it to frame 1. Frame 1 technically plays after frame 5. I had to use different folders or kind of timelines so that I can copy and paste the different parts of the hair around. Then I take the left side part of the hair from frame 1 and have it play on frame 2. I do this for all the frames and it looks like a mess at the moment because I'm not erasing the hair from the original frame that's under it. But I will once I finish the copying and pasting process. I didn't want to accidentally get rid of hair that I needed. And I'm sorry if all of this is really confusing. It's a bit hard to explain, but I hope it kind of makes sense. Technically, I could have just drawn the hair with the left side being delayed, but that felt more complicated. It felt easier to draw the hair in unison and then to add the delay by copying and pasting. So now here's the hair movement with the delay. I feel like this really helps liven things up. Next was cleanup and in-betweens. I started by cleaning up the keyframes. Then I'll go in between the keyframes with more frames to help the motion feel smoother. This was a long and tedious process, which is why we are switching over to the Clip Studio Paint captured footage. Something I was really struggling with is keeping the hair somewhat consistent between the frames, but also keeping track of all the different lines. The lower part of the hair was pretty easy, but the bangs kept giving me a lot of trouble. Also, something I was trying to incorporate with the animation is that some strands will appear and disappear with the movement. So like when the hair is being blown all the way to the left, I have a strand pop out. But as it moves to the other direction, the strand gets pushed back into the group of hair, if that makes sense. If you look closely at animated hair in anime, you'll often see this if you pay close attention. You'll kind of see strands sort of appearing and disappearing. I do wish I would have made the hair, especially the lower area, a bit more detailed. I do feel like overall it is very simple, but this is also my first real attempt at animating hair like this, so I think it's for the best that I didn't try to get overly complicated with things. It probably would have been frustrating to overwhelm myself with very detailed hair. I was thinking about doing a few animations for this video, but this one alone took me like 5 hours, so I didn't really have time to work on another one. Plus, it makes it so I can explain the whole process to you in more detailed instead of trying to rush through it to show you multiple animations. So here's how the hair looks with cleanup and in-betweens. I was thinking about going with a slower motion for the hair, but this would require more frames, and I didn't feel like doing that, so faster motion it is. So let's take a moment to slow things down before jumping into doing the line art for the hair. I wanted to do the line art for the character. Also, let's get back to the subject as to why I wish I would have made the TourBox a part of my process sooner. And honestly, the main reason is that it helps my right arm get less tired. You see, I have a pretty large drawing tablet, and when I want to switch brushes or tools, I have to reach over to the left and select what I want. And I do have Express keys on my tablet, but for some reason the Express keys haven't wanted to sync with Clip Studio Paint, and all of the buttons are exactly the same, so it can be a little hard to keep track of which button does what. So if TourBox, instead of reaching over to the left to change to different tools or switch my brush size, I can switch these things with a simple scroll or button press. I can easily change between the pen tool and the liquify tool, or I can easily change if I'm using my main color, secondary color, or the transparent option. I use the transparent option as my eraser when I am drawing, so being able to switch to it with a button press is so convenient. And you might be thinking, Becca, this makes you sound very lazy. How hard is it to reach over and select the tool you want? And yeah, it does sound easy to reach over and select my tool, but when you're reaching over to the left over and over and over again, it does start to take a toll. Plus, I almost didn't realize how much time I was spending clicking on my tools and adjusting the size until I got the TourBox. Like, I can change to a different tool and the size of it so much faster now. Plus, doing things like rotating my canvas and zooming in is way easier. I was always using the navigator in the upper right, but now I can navigate my canvas without having to move away from my work area. Okay, so enough fangirling about the TourBox for now. Let's talk about the animation. So as you can see, I'm finishing up the line art for the first frame of hair. Now I just need to repeat that like 8 more times. For a lot of my other animations, I do a lot of copying and pasting for the line art process to save time. However, for this, since the hair is moving so much, I couldn't really copy any of it. I guess I could have copied the top part of the head since it doesn't move too much, but I still wanted it to have some movement so it didn't feel out of place. I didn't want it to just be super still and have the rest of the hair moving a lot. While doing the line art, I tried to really pay attention to how long or short I was drawing my lines. I noticed that with my cleanup, the lines for the bangs and hair part would vary in length from frame to frame, so I tried to make sure to keep the lines more consistent this time for the line art. Or if I did have them change in length, it felt more natural instead of changing super suddenly between frames. I feel like the time-lapse makes this process look super easy, but trust me, I was switching back and forth between frames to double check things because the onion skins were too confusing sometimes, and it required a lot of thinking. Oh, also, I did the line art for the back of the hair on a different animation folder that is under all my other folders. Since the under part of the hair is at the back of the head, I technically could have done all this in the same animation folder. But for coloring, it felt like it'd be more simple if I made the hair in the back have its own folder. Speaking of coloring, that's what I'm doing next. I'm going with mostly simple cell shading. I also did this with the eyes. I did add a bit of a gradient to them, but tried to mostly use cell shading, that way the eyes fit in with the coloring style. Next was filling in all the frames of the hair with color. I decided to go with a dark blue since it would complement the gold eyes. At this part, having the TourBox to assist me was really helpful. When filling in colors like this, I'm switching back and forth between the fill tool and the pen tool a ton, because for each frame, I had to zoom in and clean up the smaller areas, but then also switch back to the fill tool to be filling in the areas again. Oh, also, in case you're curious, here's a list of my setup. It's basically just the default Clip Studio Paint setup with some changes to fit my needs. There are more button combinations you can do, but I keep mine pretty simple, and this is a list of the main buttons I use. I also really like that you can display this list of what buttons do. It was super helpful when I was first using the TourBox and getting used to it. After filling in all the colors, I added a cloud background to make things more dramatic. And the last step was adding shadows and highlights to the hair. I knew doing this would be kind of tedious, but I also felt like it would help the hair a lot. So I used a muted purple color set to multiply and added shadows to the hair as well as under the hair to help it feel like it's coming away from the head a bit. Like how I did with the line art, I was trying to make sure the shadows didn't vary too much in places that stayed more consistent, like around the hair part. But once again, I didn't want to just copy and paste it so that it has some movement. Oh, also, another helpful video is this one by Char. She made a video about animating hair in different ways. I absolutely love her animations. They are so good and adorable. I get so excited whenever she releases new stuff. I highly recommend checking out her channel. Animating is always such an interesting process because it's often very long and tedious and takes hours of work to make even just short animations. But when you see the art move and come to life, it makes all of that work you put into it worth it. There's always something just so cool about it and that feeling. Whenever I make animation videos, people will comment things like, you should make an anime or animate your webcomic. And yeah, that would be cool, but it would probably never happen. I enjoy dabbling with animation, but I don't think I'd ever do any super long projects with it. I just don't think I have the patience for that. But anyways, I applied some gradients that are clipped to the hair folder to help give the hair more interest and variation. Also, to help the character fit in, I applied a muted blue set to multiply to the character folder so that the colors now fit in with the background. Lastly, I wanted to make the hair look shiny. I really wrestled with how to do the highlights, and I finally decided on this method and shape. For the highlights, I do copy and paste them, but change them in each frame to help them match the movement of the hair. Also, if you're interested in checking out TourBox, there are links in the description and pinned comment. Like I said, I'm really glad I've been integrating it into my work. It has truly helped streamline my process. Now that I'm getting used to using it in Clip Studio Paint, I want to try to use it with my video editing software. Oh, also, don't forget to check out the Neo and Light versions. These are great options if you're on a tighter budget. And with all of that, the animation is finally done. Let's take a look at how it turned out. So yeah, that is my attempt at animating hair. I definitely learned a lot from this, and I feel I will be able to apply the things I learned from this to my future animations. I feel like the hair in my previous animations were always kind of lacking, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But now I feel like I have a better idea of what I should do. It's definitely not perfect, and I have a long ways to go, but it's progress. Before we end, I want to thank my super awesome YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!